Hello, soul family. I made it on live, lost track of time a little bit as I was preparing this material of what I'm going to share today. And so I'll give it a few moments to see who hops on because I know there's a couple people interested in this live especially. Otherwise, I will. Hola, Cristal. Hi, Mama. You're just in time for the conversation. I'm going to be talking about shadow and how to integrate it, what that means. Just going to give one more moment to see if anybody else hops on. Hola. Crystal, would you tell me from your perspective, what is shadow for you? Like, what do you think shadow is? Go ahead and write it in the comments just so I could see. And I'll just go ahead and let you fill that in. Whatever you do, there's always a lag. Okay, cool. So you said basically anything that you reject or causes resistance. Yeah, that's a big part of the shadow, parts that have caused us resistance. Okay, and things that feel out of balance and you have a hard time integrating. Perfect. Exactly. So I guess I'll just go on in and start sharing what I have for you guys today. The shadow is, yes, big parts of that, the parts of us that we have in resistance. But oftentimes with shadow specifically, you don't know what it is exactly that you're resisting because the shadow is all of the unconscious parts of your personality and the unconscious parts of your identity even. So that's from a psychological standpoint what shadow is, right? And how does this affect us? Because when we have something that we're unaware of, then we begin to play it out in our day-to-day experience and reality. And so the shadow is often formed from projections from childhood, projections from our parents when they imprinted within us their perspectives and their beliefs, right? And sometimes our parents were just doing the best that they could with the resources they had. And so when their resources were not good resources, then they would be projecting onto us something that was, hola Tamara, something that was a fear-based projection, right? That created some type of limitation or some type of a distortion. Tamara, we're talking about the shadow and what it means to have your shadow and to integrate your shadow. And so, for example, for me in my life, I developed a shadow early on when I experienced trauma from sexual abuse, for one. That made me feel as if the expression of my truth was not a safe expression. And therefore I suppressed that part of me. I suppressed my truth. I suppressed the expression of my voice. And those parts of us that are completely separated from us, like you said, Crystal, the parts that we reject of ourselves, that does become our shadow. And so then later on in life, different circumstances, in particular with my relationship to my parents, for example, made it so that anytime I had to be confronted in a situation or I had to confront a conflict or a situation where I needed to stand up for myself, I was then experiencing my shadow or living from my shadow, where I then held on to the belief that it was not safe to express my truth. And as a result, I would hide my identity. And so on a psychological standpoint, this is what's happening, right? Our inner being is creating all these different coping mechanisms for how we relate to the world. And in order for me in that moment to stay safe within that smaller identity, I would do a coping mechanism like smile or pretend to be okay, right? Meanwhile, inner shadow, energetically on a spiritual level, then the psychology goes deeper, right? Because it impacts your spirit, it impacts your chakra, your energy body, and you then start to experience blocks within your energy centers. And in this scenario where I was afraid to express my truth, again, having projections coming from my parents or certain situations, whatever it was, I would then hold back from expressing my truth, and then that would create a block in my heart center where I felt really heartbroken and self-abandoned. And then on top of that, my solar plexus, right? So instead of going out for like the lead, I remember growing up and trying to be part of like shows and like when I was in drama and in theater and wanting to audition and then feeling so afraid of actually going up on that stage and doing that big scary thing. And so what happens, right? We end up growing up with these shadow identities that we don't pay attention to because we've used our coping mechanisms to suppress the shadow, right? And every time we go out into the world and we act on behalf of, suppressing the shadow, right? I don't go after that audition, or I don't speak to that authority figure. I don't speak my truth. Every time you act in that behavior, you unconsciously, of course, the shadow grows. It becomes something bigger that then can take over your life and who you are, who you become in the world. It holds you back. Okay. And so essentially that's what holding a shadow identity creates for you, is a distorted separation between who you are in a soul level, what you came here to do in this earth, and your mission, and also who you are projecting yourself out to be in the world, and how that's showing up in your various relationships and your various work dynamics and every way that you're showing up, okay? So I wanted to mention a few ways that you could potentially start to notice your shadow when you're experiencing shadow. And so one of the ways is paying attention to your projections. So this can go from, like for me, for example, I had really big projections against my family, specifically against my mother. I kind of felt like she was the root of my problems because she was not, a very kindly spoken person. She was not compassionate, oftentimes reactive. And I would say, my mom's this and my mom's that. And I would have this reactive label towards her. And yet that projection that was going outward towards someone else was exactly the energy that I was holding at that time. Okay. So listening to your projections and what they are is one key way to be able to notice your shadow. Another way that I started to realize that I had a problem, that there was something that needed to be resolved, was when hi Brittany, welcome to the call. We're talking about shadow today. Was when I noticed myself being very emotionally triggered. So because of the suppressed shadow, me not feeling safe speaking my truth, which was one of the biggest ones that I had to deal with. And now here's the other thing too. There's several shadows, guys. We all have many different shadows, many different coping mechanisms that we've created. And then depending on what part of your life is and whether or not you've spiritually awakened, you'll start becoming consciously aware of a few of them, and then that's when you know that there's work to be done, right? Because like I said, the shadow is unconscious. You don't really recognize these parts of you until they're brought into your awareness enough for you to recognize them, which is why I'm having this conversation today, because whoever's tuning in, you can use this information to then start noticing your shadows. So I was saying triggers, emotional triggers is a big part as well. So emotional triggers for me were into adulthood later on. Anytime I had to go and talk to like a supervisor or speak my truth about like wanting a raise or something like that, I would get extremely nervous, extremely afraid of some type of negative reaction on the other side, and my mind would start going into these stories, right? And so that trigger would then either hold me back from expressing what I needed, Or I would quite literally like shut down, and it would be like 2 or 3 days of me feeling really emotionally depressed because I wasn't integrating my shadow. And so here's the other thing too, is that when you start noticing your shadow, oftentimes what most people do is that they will start judging themselves for their shadow. Okay, you'll start judging your behavior, judging yourself for being, reacting in that type of way. And when you're judging your shadow to that degree, it actually makes the shadow bigger as well. Okay, so the idea here is that you begin to notice when you're in shadow energy. And by noticing it, you start sending it light, right? The shadow is darkness. You start sending those parts of you light through love, through acceptance, through observation, witnessing what's happening on a non-judgmental perspective. Okay, so another way that you can pick up on a shadow pattern is by noticing repeating patterns. And if you see me looking down, it's because I have a piece of paper and it's helping me remember the whole conversation. So noticing repeat patterns in your life, okay? This was another big way that I was able to notice some really dark shadows that I had in relation to my relationships. I had a pattern where every relationship would end more or less in the same way, right? With there being a sense of disloyalty, whether it was through cheating or through lying. Again, not feeling safe and fully revealing the identity, right? And there would just be a similar pattern every time. And then oftentimes in the reactiveness. So if you're finding yourself having the same type of arguments with your partner over and over again, you're obviously being triggered by something in your external reality. And the way that you're reacting to that argument is going to tell you, where you lie in that shadow, like how you're holding that shadow within you. Okay. So for me, for example, let me think. I would often find myself arguing about like wanting space from my partner, wanting them to leave me alone or to give me a break. And then they would respect that, right? And then within me, I would start feeling that abandonment fear, like, oh my gosh, they're going to leave, or I better just push them away because if not, I'm going to end up alone anyways, right? And all these beliefs and all of that energy that I felt was it's fragmented within you, right? It's very separate. It's very distorted from what you actually want to experience in the world, which is to feel loved and to feel accepted as you are, right? So in that scenario, even though I was expressing, okay, I want space from you, they would take that space, but then I would end up feeling, whether it was like sad or wrong or ashamed for saying what I wanted to say at that moment or expressing myself in that way. And so holding on to that shadow once again. Again, because of the way that I was judging myself, right? Because of the way that I was judging my shadow in those circumstances, I would then end up either going into emotional triggers and spirals, right? And feeling into the trigger and going down that rabbit hole, which is often what happens when we're living in our shadow. You'll find yourself going down emotional rabbit holes for some time. Or I would end up like breaking down the relationship and then it would end. I wouldn't be able to handle it and have conscious communication because there was no consciousness to that behavior. That was just a reaction based on the shadow. Okay. So I hope this is landing for anybody, for everybody who's listening here. Does anybody have any questions about shadow? What does shadowing mean, Jen? Shadowing. So shadowing or shadow, we're talking about the shadow. And the shadow are all the unconscious parts of your personality. All the unconscious parts of your personality, the unconscious parts of your identity. We all have some form of shadow. Oftentimes it is developed from a young age. It can come from projections from your parents and how they made you feel about yourself. In my case, I was giving the example of how I wanted to be fully expressive as I was, and I often felt like it was not safe to do that. And when I tried to express myself and it wasn't validated, then I learned to suppress my ability to fully express myself. And that created a shadow type of response, right? Instead of being an open and integrated person, instead I would just pretend to be happy or pretend to be okay with a situation, and therefore self-abandon, right? That's one of the qualities that I developed within my shadow. So here I'm giving you guys some tips and as to how you can begin to notice and pinpoint when you're in your shadow. Among them, noticing your projections, noticing when you're in your trigger, okay? Emotionally triggered, right? Sometimes the thing about the emotional trigger one is it's tricky because sometimes you get triggered emotionally, like say that you see someone and like you're dating someone and you see them talking to another person and you become jealous over that situation. It's a very visceral energy, okay? And therefore you go and pursue the trigger, right? You go and react emotionally, go over there and smack your boyfriend instead of like taking a step back. And so when you're being confronted with a shadow, a really important thing to do when you're feeling that trigger, right? Noticing that shadow is something that is a part of you. So becoming aware of when you're feeling that trigger and asking yourself, why? Why am I feeling this way right now? Instead of going into the reactive and emotional response. Taking a step back and asking yourself why is a powerful way that you can begin to, again, observe what's happening in a non-judgmental way and not react, and then instead respond to the situation as it's happening. Because anytime that you react, again, anytime you go on the tangent because the shadow took you there, then that is a way to grow the shadow, okay? So how do we begin to integrate all of this? Because that's the point of shadow work, okay? You want to do shadow work so that you can integrate your shadow. Integration means radically accepting these parts of you that perhaps you have felt that were wrong, that were broken, that were your crazy syndrome, like whatever it was about you, looking at that and really sending light and love and acceptance to that part of you. Why is this valuable? Because the minute that you start shifting those identities, the minute you begin to bring light to that awareness, it literally frees up your energy. And when I say frees up your energy, I mean like quite literally your brain, everything will begin to feel lighter. You will begin to feel empowered once again. You will begin to recognize that your shadows are oftentimes your biggest gifts, because they truly, truly are. They can be your best friends, okay? In my case, my biggest shadow, one of the biggest ones, was fear of communication, fear of full expression. Lo and behold, I began to observe the shadow when it was happening. When I started feeling triggered, like I was scared to speak my truth, now I have techniques that I use that I can pull back, drop into my energetic vessel, into my body, get grounded, get centered, and recognize almost from like this higher perspective, okay, I have the power here and I own this shadow. I love this shadow. I see it. It doesn't get to take over. It doesn't get to overrun me. And therefore, my shadow can become a part of me. And when that happens, now look at me. I'm over here expressing all these things that, even before this call, I had a little bit of that energy of like, oh, okay, I'm going to do something kind of scary right now. But it's nowhere near what it used to be when it would just completely take me off track and I'd be like, no, I'm not going to do it. Because that's what happens, guys. We have this fragmentation within our identities and then we don't show up fully. We don't show up fully for our lives. We don't show up fully for the visions that we have for our dreams. And some of us are so deeply embedded and separated from our truth and embedded and hidden in our shadow that we don't even dare to dream to be something, a different version of ourselves that can have a better life and better relationships and a better career opportunity. We don't even dare to dream on that, right? So, that's the point. That's the point of the shadow alchemy work. So another one of the ways that you can begin to work with the shadow, like I said, self-observing, right? Self-observing through looking at your shadow in a non-critical way, and this often happens when you're in a trigger, you're experiencing something that doesn't feel good in your body, okay? That's your first sign. It doesn't feel good. Just notice it. What is it? Ask yourself, what's here? Why is this happening to me? Another really powerful way that you can begin to integrate your shadow is by introspective work. So this is sometimes a little bit more challenging because introspective work requires that you sit down and ask yourself the questions to dig into your identity, to dig into who you are, right? And oftentimes we don't take time out to do this because we're so busy with our lives, right? And who wants to go and like sit and feel bad about themselves? Like no one does, right? Nobody wants to really dig this stuff up. But again, like I said, it's so valuable that you take the time out to do this, because when you do, if you find yourself blocked in something, you find yourself repeating same patterns over and over again, or negative behaviors or self-sabotage, like you name it, it's your shadow is 100% behind that, okay? So you can do introspective work, and when you do this work, you start asking yourself, what parts of me do I not fully accept? What parts of me am I judging about myself? Okay. You can ask, in what ways am I afraid to express myself or show up? Okay. That's another thing that you can ask yourself. Also, a really powerful way that you can really get clear on where these identities are coming from is by looking at your childhood. So looking back and asking yourself, in what areas of my life did I not feel accepted by my parents, or where did I feel judged by them, or where am I holding a fear that is a similar fear to what my mom had, and now I am holding that same type of fear or energy, right? So, for example, for me, my mom, I felt like growing up, she worked very hard, and every time that she would come home from work, she would kind of have sadness or frustration because she was so tired from work and she was not feeling very happy within her life, right? And so within me, I started then holding on to the same type of an identity. Work is hard, life's a struggle, these types of beliefs, right? That were then forming who I was. And at a core level, because they're forming this shadow identity, the coping mechanism to that for me was, okay, well, I'm just not going to go find like a job where I have to be at all the time. Or I'm just not going to go for my dream and work at my business because I don't want to work hard, right? At a core level, that shadow was holding resistance against myself, and I was just completely separating myself from it. So in the shadow work, in healing, is noticing where you're holding on to those patterns from your childhood that were very triggering for you growing up and may be showing up now for you. It's an interesting thing. We always end up becoming just like our parents, whether we like it or not. There's parts of us, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But the whole goal is that we can also liberate ourselves and break free from ancestral ties and all that stuff. I'll make another point here too, is that for some people, you may have been raised by perfectly good parents, right? You may not really be able to point out exactly why you have certain fears when it comes down to certain things. And at that point in time, it could be also related to a past life identity, something that happened to you in a karmic, energetic sense. And you came into this lifetime so that you could finally become aware of it and finally defeat it, finally get over it. So if there's any type of irrational type of fear, or you're holding yourself back in some way, then those are shadow aspects that can certainly be addressed. And once you become aware of them as how they're holding you back, then you can, like I said, alchemize it. Alchemize it means integrate it. Alchemy is to transform one substance into the other. We want to transform that shadow into light, okay? And at the very least, like, learn to see all of your triggers, learn to see all of your shadows as your best friends, because they are a part of you, not a weird, dirty, or fucked up part of you, but a really good part of you that can actually give you strength and can give you gifts, okay? Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen, for your words and for being present. So does anybody else have any more questions about shadow? Any more questions about shadow? I hope that you take this video. I'm going to repost it so you guys can certainly look back at it and consider these different parts, like I said, to be able to pinpoint your shadow and what it means and how to locate it so that you can finally free yourself from that shadow and bring it light. Now, if you have any more questions, let me know so I can definitely answer. And I want you to know that this is what I help my clients with. So if you want to do shadow work, if you want to go deeper in my programs, particularly right now, I'm launching my next program, which is called the School of Spiritual Embodiment. We're going to start April 1st, okay? And in this program, I help you as a mirror, a reflection to you, to help you understand where you're holding your shadows, because like I said, they're unconscious. So sometimes we don't see where, through our words, through our excuses, through why, oh man, it's so valid. It just has to be like this. I have to show up this way in the world. Not necessarily, right? Sometimes you need someone that can reflect that back to you. So in the program, we're going to be going through very specific journal prompts and exercises that are going to help you understand your shadow, locate your shadow, and locate those fragmented identities so that you can finally bring them back into integration, okay? We're going to be doing some reparenting work. We're going to be, like I said, getting clear on the identities that we're choosing to step into and exactly what's standing in the way of that, okay? It's usually your shadow in some way. So this is going to be a part of it. And then a lot of the school is also going to be about you creating that new version of you. So this type of program is really powerful for you if you're not going to see yourself doing this work on your own, right? If you want someone that will be there to walk you through the process when you go into these containers, this program in particular is going to be an 8-week container. So it's like you step into this portal where you get all this support, you have accountability from people, you have that mirror where you can find and dig in through everything. And so it creates a lot of transformation really fast in a short amount of time. And that's why you'd want to sign up for something like the School of Spiritual Embodiment, which is the program. So anyways, like I said, we're starting April 1st. So if you're interested in doing this work, so that you can fully step into your body, your empowerment, so you can fully own your power, you have to learn to let that shit go first because it's taking up your energy. And so that's what we are here to do. Fully embody our spiritual potential and powers. Your spirituality is everything that you are, everything and every way that you're showing up in the world, okay? So if you are interested, then let me know. Drop me a DM. I'm currently taking people on for application calls because I do want this to be a small circle. It's very important to me that I know where you're at in your journey so that I can then support you and give you all the tools that you need in order for you to make really big lasting change, okay? Transformation. And so if you're interested in that, then let me know and drop me a message and we'll get on a phone call together and talk all the details, okay? So I hope that you found this valuable. Yes, let that shit go, said Brittany. Exactly. So I love you guys, and I hope everyone has a most beautiful day. Identify, forgive, and grow. Absolutely. Thank you, Crystal, for hopping on. Love you. Bye.